Well, we are in part 2 of the series Collision, where grace and truth collide. And last week in part 1, we looked at the tension that the word "and" creates between grace and truth. John writes in John chapter 1 that Jesus came full of grace and truth, to the rim, overflowing. He embodied grace and truth. But remember, the "and" creates all the tension. And what we want to do with the tension, we want to get rid of it, so we slide in the word "or." And as soon as we do that, and all of us human beings want to do this, we want to get rid of the tension. Now we go grace or truth, and we start playing a game with both of these words. With grace, we treat it like the get out of jail free card. And with our sin, my sin, your sin, we want to play that card. It's like a warm blanket. We're like, oh, God, I know I'm a sinner, but your grace, I'm so thankful for your grace. And then the next breath, with that sin we don't understand, the sin we don't get, the sin that bothers us that other people do, we just have a stack of the go directly to jail cards. We're just ready to, bam, just throw that card at that person, those people. Again, with the sin we don't like, we don't understand, we don't get. And what Jesus kept on coming back to is that he was full of grace and truth. In fact, Jesus over and over and over again modeled, taught, lived out the tension between these two. Now, I'm going to ask you a question here in a moment. But before I ask the question, I just want to be very clear. Do not say your answer out loud. Now, if you have a roll of duct tape and you're tempted to say your answer out loud, maybe just grab that roll of duct tape, because everyone carries a roll of duct tape in their pocket, and just put that piece of duct tape over your mouth. If you're sitting next to someone that you know they think out loud, whatever goes on in their brain, they say out loud, just gently, gently, it's church, gently put your hand over their mouth so they won't say their answer. Whatever you do, don't say your answer out loud. You got me? Okay, here's my question. What is that sin that you don't get and that really bothers you? What's that sin when you hear someone with that sin, you think to yourself, God, are you really going to forgive that? When you discover a Christian has done that sin, you think to yourself, real Christians, God-fearing Christians, Christians who are saved by Jesus, they wouldn't do that. What sin in that box when you think of maybe a person or a group of people? I mean, they're right there. And again, you're like, I know God's grace covers everyone, but again, not out loud. You know what's in that box. And that sin, that person, those people, it's the first group where you're going to take out of your pocket that go to jail card and slap it on them. As we make our way through the story today, I want you to keep them in mind. That sin, that person, those people. I want you, and you know what it is, just keep that in focus. Now, with part 2 and part 3, we're going to look at two stories, again, that just embody grace and truth and the tension that erupts between grace and truth. Today, we're going to stay in the Gospel of John. And what I love about John is an eyewitness. He walked with Jesus, heard Jesus teach. I mean, he was there. And today, as we make our way through this story in John chapter 4, remember, John, who's writing the story of Jesus some 45 to 50 years later, he was there. He lived through this story. And so he sits down to write the story, and this is what he writes. Now he, Jesus, had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Now, there's so many details in this opening thought to this story. And it'd be so easy to look at all of these details and just think to yourself, well, that's not important. But I'm just telling you, all of these details are so important to the story that's going to unfold. You see, we look at those two words, had to. Did Jesus have to? Did the disciples have to? Well, let's look at a map real fast so you understand the context of, the story. Jerusalem was located in an area called Judea. Jerusalem and Judea was kind of the religious and political epicenter of Judaism. Up north was Galilee. If you wanted to get out of the intensity of Jerusalem, and again, the Jewish political and religious epicenter, you would make your way up to Galilee. And sandwiched between Judea and Galilee was Samaria. Now, the Samaritans disliked the Jews, but the Jews loathed, disdained. The strongest word you could come up with, that's what the Jews felt against the Samaritans. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But remember, John writes, they had to go through Samaria. Now, here's what we know. There was two major routes between Galilee and Judea. One was the long route, which avoided Samaria. It would go from Jerusalem through Jericho. On the other side of the Jordan River, they would make their way all the way up until they could cross back over into Galilee. And then they wouldn't have to go through Samaria. But that was the long route. It would take 5 to 7 days. The shortest route, the quick route, was between Jerusalem through Samaria into Galilee. In fact, what John tells us is they came to the town called Sychar. Now, we go back to John 4. John writes, now he had to. Now that should make you pause for a moment because what we just looked at, they didn't have to. There was a long route that they could have gone through. But John goes, they had to. You see, this Greek phrase didn't mean there was no other option. This Greek phrase literally means out of necessity. Jesus said, we have to go this way. Probably the disciples were a little bothered going, no, we don't have to. And Jesus is like, no, it's necessary. It's necessary for today. This is the route we are going to travel. So they made their way to Sychar, and we're told that Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, it was around a 30 to 35 mile walk from Jerusalem to Sychar. That's a long ways. They also ascended and descended thousands and thousands of feet of elevation. It was very mountainous country. So saying he was tired was an understatement. So he sat down by the well, and it was about noon. Then a woman, a Samaritan woman, came to draw water. Now, we don't know her name, and I was thinking about this, and we could have just kept on using Samaritan woman, but this was a real person. This was a real woman with a real story. So I was like, we got to give her a name. So I thought, Sammy, the Samaritan woman, that has a ring to it. So I'm just going to call her Sammy for the rest of our time. So Sammy comes to draw water, and Jesus says to her, will you give me a drink? I mean, Jesus was tired. He had just walked 30, 35 miles. It was noon. It was the heat of day. He's thirsty. He looks at her. He's like, hey, I need a drink. And then John gives us this insight that the disciples had gone into town to buy food. So that means Jesus was by himself with this woman. That's another important detail we'll get to in a moment. Then Sammy said to Jesus, and just apply all the sarcasm you can imagine. You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? Again, all the sarcasm, all the disdain, all the hatred you can imagine. I mean, this is in her voice. And then John, again, records this other insight. For Jews, do not associate with Samaritans. Now, this is a really tame way to translate this ancient Greek phrase. The literal translation, what John wrote, would have been this. For Jews do not use dishes Samaritans have used. Do you feel that? Do you feel the hatred, the divide between the two? Now, we have to grasp the full picture of this story. You see, we have Sammy and Jesus. And there's this massive chasm, divide, wall, barrier between Sammy, the Samaritan woman, and Jesus. You see, there was a political divide, a political separation between the two. I mean, this barrier, this divide was over 700 years in the making. You see, in 722 is when Assyria came down and took away the northern 10 tribes, the northern kingdom. And this is the land where Samaria is now. And when finally they were released to kind of come back home, these Jews had intermarried with, pagans. And so the rest of the Jews just always looked at them as not real Jews. They were mixed breeds, mixed blood. And that just erupted the divide between the two. There was a religious divide, a religious barrier between the Samaritans and the Jews. And this is going to feel, again, so, just yucky. For the Jewish people, they have what's called the oral law, the spoken law. It's called the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, literally they have this written down, that all Samaritans will always be unclean, that all Samaritan women will always be in a state of being unclean. If you're unclean, you can't worship God. You can't serve God. You can't, because you're unclean. But that Samaritan women were always in a state of being unclean. Why? Because, again, this is according to the Mishnah, that Samaritan women were always, how do I want to say this for all audiences? They were always in that time of the month. You following me? And because they were constantly in that state, that they were unclean, which made their husbands and the other people they connected with unclean. And so if a Jew touched a Samaritan woman or a Samaritan man, they would now become unclean. I mean, think about that barrier, that divide. This Samaritan woman, knowing what Jews believed about her, all of a sudden Jesus by himself sitting at the well asked her for water. That would make Jesus unclean. Tension was redlined. And then there was a cultural divide. I mean, she was a female and Jesus was a male. To this day, if you went to Jerusalem where the Temple Mount is and you walked up to the Wailing Wall where Jews are praying, there's literally a section that only men can enter, and then they have another section for where only women can enter and pray. To this day, if you're a woman, you're not allowed. They have signs where you cannot enter to pray. This Samaritan woman understood culturally the divide between men and women. The one divide she didn't realize, the one barrier she didn't realize was there was a job, a position barrier. Now, we're not sure her job, but Jesus fully understood that everyone considered Jesus to be a rabbi, a Jewish spiritual teacher, which means the political, religious, and cultural rules were the most important. And what does Jesus do? With one question, hey, will you give me water? What does he do? He completely implodes the political, religious, cultural, and job positional divide. He just completely implodes them. Why? Because Jesus wanted to get right here. He knew where he was going. He knew what was most important. And Jesus didn't care about the political, religious, cultural, and job. He wanted, that's where he was headed. So the woman had asked him the question, how can you ask me for a drink? How can you ask me, a woman, a Samaritan, for a drink? And Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift, God's grace extended for all people. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now that phrase, what she would have heard was running or flowing water. Remember, they're at a well. Every detail matters. Sammy goes, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can I get this living, this running, this flowing water?" Again, apply all the sarcasm you possibly can in this conversation. Sammy goes, are you greater than our father Jacob? Now, Jacob was the connecting point. Jacob, the father of the 12 sons that became the 12 tribes that became Israel. At one point, they were all united, and now they hated each other. He goes, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it itself, and did also his sons and his livestock? And Jesus answers, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. Hey, Sammy, everyone, Sammy, everyone who drinks will be thirsty again. But whoever, and Sammy, you are a whoever, drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And she replies, again, she is not buying this. She is not wanting to listen. She does not think that his intentions are good. And Sammy goes, sir, fine, give me this water so that I won't be thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water every day. Fine, give me this water. And then Jesus flips the script. He says, hey, Sammy, go call your husband and come back. And all of a sudden, tension erupts right from within her. The tension of the end. I mean, at this point, Jesus has shown her so much grace, so much love, sitting with her, having this conversation. But all of a sudden, the tension wells up within Sammy. She looks at Jesus. She goes, I have no husband. And Jesus said, hey, Sammy, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands. And the man you now have, the man you're now living with, is not your husband. What you said is quite true. You see, what Jesus was after, why Jesus was willing to decimate the political, the religious, the cultural, the positional, the job barrier, was because he was after her heart. Hey, Sammy, your heart is just fractured because sin. Jesus, who's without sin, sat with her. She was completely consumed. Her life was in shambles. And he looked at her, said, I have a gift, living water for you. And I'm going to call out what was going on in your heart. Sammy looked at Jesus and said, sir, I can see that you are a prophet. All of a sudden, she starts to understand that there's something different about Jesus. And all of a sudden, Jesus starts to connect the Samaritan kind of framework of faith to the Jewish framework of faith. And he starts to bring these together and paint this picture to help her kind of on this spiritual journey. As he gets done doing this, Sammy looks at Jesus and says, I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus looks at her and goes, I'm the one speaking to you. I am he. And just then, his disciples, John, who's writing this, he's one of the disciples, John, and there are other disciples, they show up, they return, and they were surprised, they were perplexed at what they were seeing, Jesus with this Samaritan woman. But no one asked, what do you want? That question directed at Sammy. And the second question, why are you talking with her? A question they wanted to ask but didn't to Jesus. Now we'll pause there on this story for a moment. You see, I think about Sammy. I think about Jesus. And there's some insights that I just want to pause and pull out of the story. One of the insights I just want to focus in on is just sin. Sammy's sin, your sin, my sin. You see, Jesus he wants to give us living water. Water that quenches the thirst within us. And our sin is, it's out to destroy us. That's what sin does. It creates destruction within us internally and externally. I mean, I think about the destruction of Sammy's sin. 5 husbands and now living with the 6th. Think about the relational damage that she created for other husbands. And we don't know the full story. We don't know what happened and why it happened and all that. But just think about the fractured relationships in this town. Think about within her what she had experienced over and over and over again. And here's the thing. Sin destroys. Sin creates destruction within all of us. And it's easy to kind of put sin in a box and say, well, Chris, it's just my sin. No one knows. It's just within me. And I know it's not good, but it's not hurting anyone else. And I would say, no, sin always destroys, even if it's internal within you. And sin has different intensities of consequences. And let me explain. Let's say you do something that offends me, that hurts me, right? And I go, I've forgiven you. But internally, that anger just erupts. I mean, I'm thinking about how I can get my payback against you. Now, maybe I see you at the grocery store a week later, and I see you, and I say hi, and we high five, we fist bump, right? It's all good. But internally, I'm like, yeah, I know what you did. Now, it'd be easy for me to say, oh, yeah, but Chris, that's my sin. It's just internal. But you know what that internal sin does to every relationship connected to me? It starts to destroy it. Because bitterness settles in, and all of a sudden now, I think every single person is going to do the same thing to me. Now, I said there's different consequences. Same scenario. You hurt me. I go, yeah, I forgive you, but internally I don't. I see you at the grocery store, and I grab a baseball bat, and I just take out your knees. Same anger, same sin, vastly different consequences, right? I mean, I'd get arrested, thrown in jail, and the story would be all over Facebook. Could you imagine, right? Same sin, anger, 2 different consequences. And we have to realize that, yes, different consequences, different impact with sin, but it destroys internally and externally. Another impact of sin, it divides. I think about Sammy. She's out collecting water by herself. This was not common in that culture, in any of those cultures during that day. To be a woman traveling outside the city, the safety of the city, by yourself. And obviously, the other women came earlier in that day. She was by herself. And it's like, well, why was she by herself? Maybe because other town women shunned her. That could be true. That might be true. I also think there's another side. And remember, 2 things can be true at the same time. I think her own sin divided her from people. Whatever happened in those 5 marriages and then the guy she was shacking up with then, I just think she knew. She knew. And it was just easier for her to separate herself out. That's what sin does. It divides people. Again, it's easy to see the external sin that divides people, but the internal, when you have bitterness within you because you haven't forgiven, you haven't healed from, and all of a sudden internally, that is now creating separation or a hidden secret that you have from a spouse. He doesn't know, but you're like, oh, it's mine, it's okay, I'll work through it, it's always, she can't find out. I'm just telling you, separation, division happens all the time, and sin is whispering in our ears. Well, if no one knows, it's okay. But what's happening internally always comes out externally. And sin tries to define, tries to whisper, hey, Sammy, You're not worth anything. Hey, Sammy, you're never going to be loved. Hey, Sammy, no one's ever going to want to be with you again. Think about how many times those voices start to whisper within Sammy. I'm just telling you, that's what our sin does to us. Sin always has a gotcha. It tries to lure us in, and then it starts to whisper, you're not good enough. Man, what a loser you are. Look what you did. Look at the secret you're holding on to. What if she finds out, right? All of those little voices. Sin divides, it destroys, and it tries to define us. Another insight that we need to pull out. There's an internal thirst that cannot be quenched by the external. Sin is trying to quench our thirst on the inside with all this external stuff. Jesus goes, I'm the living water. I have to be enough for you. Hey, Sammy, you've been trying to quench that internal thirst with guy after guy after guy after guy. But Sammy, I'm enough for you. And Jesus is saying the same thing for you. I don't know what that internal thirst is, but you know because you're trying to quench it externally. You're trying to quench it externally by holding on to more and more, by trying to make more and more money and just hoarding it to yourself. Because if you have enough, I'll be secure. Maybe it's with relationships. Maybe it's with loneliness. Maybe it's with self-worth. Maybe it's with... And Jesus is like, I have to be enough for you. Is he enough for you? Another insight we got to pull out of this story. We got to stop building barriers. Sometimes us Christians have perfected building barriers. And Jesus over and over again just completely imploded the barriers. And what did Jesus do over and over and over again? He chose to sit beside. You need to choose to sit beside people. Even people that you don't get politically, even people you don't get religiously, even with people that you don't get culturally, even people in different jobs and positions that you just don't quite. I'm just telling you, over and over again, Jesus imploded the barriers to sit with people. Because ultimately, Jesus was after the heart, the soul. What barriers do you keep on trying to construct? And my encouragement for you is this: you got to sit with people you don't understand, the people, the sin, that person in that box that I said to keep in mind, sit with. And people will say to me, well, Chris, I don't want to condone people's sin. I'm not asking you to. There's a tension between grace and truth. And Jesus all the time sat with grace and truth. I know a few of you might be thinking to yourself, but Chris, and there's a story, and I've heard this before, there's a story, and you want to tell me, hey, Chris, you know the story about the woman caught in the act of adultery? And I would say, yeah, I know that story. And you would want to say to me, but Chris, what did Jesus say to the woman caught in the act of adultery? I'm like, well, I know what he said to her. Jesus told her to go and sin no more. And you would say, yeah, Chris. Jesus would tell people to go and sin no more. And I would agree with you. But let me create some tension. What did she do more of? What if I told you to go and sin no more? What would you do more of? She sinned more. What would you do? Sin more. What would I do? That doesn't excuse it. I'm just saying, keep the tension between grace and truth. Grace that covers our sin and truth that points it out. Because sin divides and destroys and tries to define. And Jesus goes, yeah, turn from that. It's wreaking havoc in your life and everyone else's life. And grace It's covering you. The Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5 says, where sin increases, grace increases more. Just keep the tension between grace and truth. Now, I mentioned that the story wasn't quite done. The disciples show up and they are surprised, they are perplexed, they can't believe what they are seeing, that Jesus is sitting alone with this Samaritan woman. But then John tells us, them leaving her water jar, Sammy leaving her jar, she went back to town and said to the people, come see, come see, come see. A man who told me everything I ever did. Truth. Told me everything. Pointed it all out. Could this be the Messiah? And many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony, because of her story. You got a story, a broken, messy, fractured story. A story of God's grace and truth in your life. You see, what Jesus is after is our hearts. To fill it with grace and truth. And I just want to encourage you. Sit with people in the messiness of their life. Sit with people and embody the grace and truth that Jesus has given you and extend that to the messiest of people. Easter is coming. And we're told that this one woman's story, many Samaritans believed. Why? Because she just told them her story, her broken, messy story, and about Jesus. One invite could change a life. One invite for you to say, come and see, come and see, come and see. There's a God who's loved you, whose grace will surround you, and his truth will lead you to living water where you'll never thirst anymore. One invite. One come and see. One, I'm going to sit with you in the mess and let's go on a journey together filled with God's grace and truth. God wants to use you and your story to breathe hope and love into the people's lives connected to you. Come and see. Come and see. Pray with me. Lord, I just pray. I pray that every single person will know that Jesus is after our heart to fill it with grace and his truth. Lord, I pray every person will know that sin destroys and divides and tries to define us. But where we sin more, grace abounds even more. And Lord, I pray for every invite. I pray every single person will know that they have a story, a messy, broken, sinful story that God wants to redeem, to create a bridge, a pathway for other people to experience his grace and love. Lord, I just pray. I pray for Easter. That can be a space where people realize the love extended through the cross. In your name I pray. Amen.